You are listening to a story exclusively narrated on the Dark Romance Stories channel. Relax and step into the world of love stories filled with mystery, emotions, and passion. Don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment to support us. This content is the property of Dark Romance Stories. Please do not copy or re-upload it in any form. The plane descended through a sky the colour of bruised peaches, and Camille Fontaine pressed her forehead to the cold oval of glass to watch Florence rise out of the Tuscan haze like something remembered rather than seen. The Duomo first, that impossible dome the colour of terracotta and old blood. Then the brown ribbon of the Arno. Then the red roofs crowding together as if the whole city had been built by hands that refused to let any beauty stand alone. She had been to Florence twice before, once as a graduate student with holes in her shoes and a stipend that barely covered the gelato, and once for a conference where she had argued for 2 hours about the proper solvent for removing varnish from a 15th century tempera panel, and won. But she had never arrived like this. First class. A car waiting, a name, Ricci, that opened doors before she even knocked. "You are the restorer," the driver said, not a question, when she emerged from the terminal. He was a broad man in a charcoal suit that fit too well to be off a rack, and his eyes moved over the crowd behind her in a way that had nothing to do with hospitality. "Signor Ricci is expecting you." "Signor Ricci," she repeated, settling into the leather of the car. "I was told I'd be working for the family. There are several, I understand." "There is one that matters." He pulled into traffic with the ease of a man who had never once worried about being told to wait. "The others learn to remember it." Camille filed the sentence away. She had a habit of collecting odd phrases, the way she collected pigments: amber, lead tin yellow, the particular green of malachite ground fine. Words were colours too, if you listened. This one was the colour of a warning she did not yet know how to read. The villa sat in the hills above the city, behind a wall the height of 2 men and a gate that opened on a low electric hum. Cypress trees stood at attention along the drive, like a row of dark candles. The house itself was old, genuinely old, 16th century at least, with the kind of weathered stucco and stone surrounds that money could not fake and only patience could maintain. Someone had loved this house, or feared losing it, for a very long time. A woman in a grey dress met her at the door, took her coat, and said nothing beyond welcome and this way. The interior smelled of beeswax and wood smoke, and something underneath, faint and floral, that Camille could not place. They passed through a hall hung with tapestries, then a sitting room where the furniture was upholstered in silk the colour of dried roses, and finally to a set of double doors that the woman opened without knocking. "The collection," she said, and stepped aside. It was a long gallery, north-facing, the windows shaded against the afternoon, and the walls. Camille forgot, for a moment, the strange driver and the stranger phrase. She forgot the long flight and the ache behind her eyes. She walked into the room the way a believer walks into a cathedral, slowly, her chin tilting up. There were perhaps 40 paintings. A Tintoretto, surely, the muscular drama of it, unmistakable. A small Bronzino portrait, the sitter's face cool and pearl pale. Something that might have been a Guercino, and beside it a panel so old its gold ground had gone to honey. She moved down the row, her breath shallow, her trained eye already cataloguing damage. A network of cracks here, a clumsy 19th century overpainting there, a bloom of mould creeping up the lower edge of a Madonna's robe that made her actually wince aloud. "You are unhappy with them," a voice said behind her. She turned. He was standing in the doorway, and she had the immediate, disorienting sense that he had been standing there for some time, watching her face instead of the paintings. He was tall, lean in the particular way of men who were dangerous before they were anything else, dressed in dark trousers and a white shirt open at the throat with the sleeves rolled to the forearm. His hair was black, pushed back, a few strands fallen loose. His face was the kind that sculptors lied about because the truth was too sharp to sell. A hard jaw, a straight nose, a mouth that looked as though it had decided long ago that smiling was a thing other people did. But it was his eyes that stopped her. They were a pale, cool grey, almost colourless in the dim room, and they were fixed on her with an attention so complete it was nearly rude. "Not unhappy," she said, recovering. "Heartbroken. This room is a crime." Something flickered across his face, not quite amusement. That is a strong word for paintings. "For neglect," she corrected, gesturing at the Madonna. "Look at this. Do you see the mould? Someone let the humidity in here run wild for years. This panel is 600 years old, and it has survived plague, war, fire, and Napoleon. And it is going to be killed by a leaking radiator and indifference." She heard her own voice rising and did not care. "It is obscene. You should be ashamed." There was a beat of silence. The woman in grey had gone very still by the door. And then the man laughed, a short, surprised sound, as though it had escaped him before he could lock it back up. "I am Alessandro Ricci," he said, stepping into the room, "and no one has told me I should be ashamed in a very long time." Camille Fontaine. She did not offer her hand, because hers were already pulling a loop from her bag, her attention sliding back to the dying Madonna. "And I imagine that's a problem you've cultivated." He came to stand beside her, closer than a stranger should, and looked at the painting she was looking at. She could smell him now, cedar, something darker beneath it. "What would you do," he asked, "to save her?" "Stop the rot first, stabilize the panel, then, slowly, give her back her face." She glanced up at him. "It will take months." "Take whatever it takes." His grey eyes moved from the painting to her, unhurried. "I find I am suddenly very interested in saving things." Camille told herself it was the painting he meant. She would spend the next several months telling herself a great many things. She set up her studio in a corner of the gallery where the north light pooled clean and even on the work table. Easels, a tray of solvents in amber glass, cotton swabs in their hundreds, the cold steel of her scalpels laid out like a surgeon's tray. She wore a canvas apron, stained the colours of a dozen finished restorations, and tied her dark hair up off her neck. And within 3 days she had forgotten there was a world outside the room. What she had not forgotten, could not seem to forget, was that Alessandro Ricci kept finding reasons to be in it. The first day, he claimed he was checking on her comfort. The second, he brought coffee himself, a small cup of espresso, bitter and perfect, and set it beside her without a word, before retreating to the long sofa at the gallery's end, where he sat with a folder of papers he did not appear to read. The third day, he brought no excuse at all. He simply came, sat, and watched her work. "You'll be bored," she warned him on the fourth day, not looking up from the Madonna. She had spent 2 hours under the microscope, removing a single square centimetre of grime, and beneath it, the original blue had emerged so pure and deep it made her chest ache. "I am not bored," he said. "Most people are. They think restoration is fast. They think I wave a cloth and the painting becomes new." She tilted the panel to the light. "It isn't fast. It's the slowest patience there is. You spend a week earning 1 inch of someone else's genius." "Tell me about the inch," he said. So she did. She had not meant to. She was, by nature, a private worker, and chatter broke her concentration. But there was something in the quality of his listening that drew the words out of her. He did not interrupt. He did not check his phone. He fixed those pale grey eyes on her hands and on her mouth, and absorbed everything she said as though it would be tested later. She told him about the underdrawing, the ghost lines the artist had laid down before the paint, visible now only in infrared, how Leonardo had sketched a hand 3 times before he committed it, how you could see the master change his mind across 500 years. She told him about the way sfumato worked, the smoke-soft blending that made the Mona Lisa's smile shift depending on where you stood, glazes laid one over another, so thin they were almost light itself. She talked for an hour, then 2, and when she finally surfaced and looked over, he was leaning forward, elbows on his knees, watching her with an expression she could not name. "You make it sound," he said slowly, "like a confession. Like the painting is telling you a secret no one else can hear." "That's exactly what it is." She set down her swab, surprised. Most people nodded politely. Most people did not understand. Every painting is a record of 1,000 decisions, where the light falls, what to leave out, what the artist loved and what he was afraid of. You just have to be quiet enough to hear it. And you are quiet enough. "It's the only thing I'm good at." She said it lightly, but it landed in the room with more weight than she'd intended. Alessandro did not laugh. That night, she ate alone in the small dining room they had set aside for her, and the woman in grey, whose name she had learned was Lucia, brought her wine and a plate of pici with garlic and oil, and told her, unprompted, that Signor Alessandro had not laughed in the house for 2 years. "I'm sure that's not true," Camille said. Lucia gave her a long, unreadable look. "You did not know the old Signor Ricci. His father." She set down the wine. "Eat. You are too thin for the work you do." Camille did not press, though the look stayed with her. His father. There was a portrait at the gallery's far end, a stern old man in black with a hawk's nose, and Alessandro's grey eyes turned cold as winter water, and she had assumed it was an ancestor. Now she wondered if the rot in the room had a date attached to it. 2 years of neglect, a house that smelled of beeswax over something else. She told herself it was none of her business. She was here for the paintings. But the next morning, when Alessandro appeared in the gallery doorway with 2 cups of espresso and that careful, contained stillness that she was beginning to recognize as a kind of hunger, she found she had set out a second stool beside her work table without quite deciding to. He looked at the stool. He looked at her. "You'll have to be quiet," she said, picking up her loupe. "I'm working." He sat. He was quiet. And Camille, bent over 600 years of someone else's patience, felt the warmth of him at her shoulder all morning, and told herself again that it was only the painting she was thinking of. It was a lie, with a long and beautiful future ahead of it. Alessandro Ricci had killed a man at 19, and he had not thought about a painting once in the 11 years since. He thought about them now constantly, or rather, he thought about the woman who thought about them, which he understood to be a more dangerous thing, though he could not yet measure how much. He had been sent to Florence by his father's successor, his uncle Salvatore, who ran the New York interests now that the old man was 3 years in the ground, to do a job that had nothing to do with art and everything to do with money. The Ricci family had spent 40 years building bridges between the New York organization and the older, quieter powers of Europe, and those bridges needed walking. Alliances needed renewing, debts needed acknowledging. And the collection in the villa, those 40 paintings Camille was so heartbroken to find neglected, was the keystone of an arrangement so elegant that even Alessandro, who had no love for the work, could admire its architecture. Art did not have a price. That was the whole point. A painting was worth what a buyer would pay, and if the buyer and seller were the same hidden hand, then a canvas could be bought for $2 million and sold for 20, and somewhere in the difference, 12 million dirty dollars became clean. The collection was a laundromat with a Renaissance face. It moved through galleries and private sales and tax-advantaged donations, and every transaction was a sentence in a language only the family's accountants could read. He had not told Camille any of this. He had hired her, on Salvatore's instruction, to restore the pieces so they would appraise higher and move more convincingly. She believed she was saving art. She was, in fact, polishing the gears of a machine that had buried more men than she would ever know existed. He should not have sat with her. He knew it the first afternoon, and he did it anyway. The thing was, and he turned this over in the dark of his bedroom at night like a stone in his palm, she did not know who he was. Not really. She knew his name, and she had clearly noted Lucia's silences and the size of the driver and the wall around the property, and she was not a stupid woman. So some part of her surely suspected the money was not clean. But she looked at him, and she did not flinch. She told him he should be ashamed. She called a leaking radiator obscene to his face, a man whose displeasure had ended other men's lives. And she did it because the paint mattered more to her than her own safety. And she had never once looked away. It undid something in him he had thought was nailed shut. "You're staring," Camille said, without turning from the Madonna. "I am thinking." "You can think and not stare. People do it all the time." She set down her scalpel and finally looked at him, a smudge of grime on her cheekbone, her dark eyes steady. "Why are you really here, Alessandro? In this room, every day. Men like you don't sit on stools and watch women clean paintings." "Men like me," he repeated. "What do you imagine men like me do?" "I don't imagine. I observe." She wiped her hands on her apron. "Your driver carries a gun under his left arm. Your housekeeper goes silent every time your father's name comes up. There are cameras on the cypress trees and a man at the gate who never sleeps. And you?" She tilted her head, studying him the way she studied a panel, looking for the underdrawing beneath the paint. "You move through your own house like a guest who isn't sure he's welcome. So no, I don't imagine. I just notice that none of it adds up to a man who has nothing better to do." He was quiet for a long moment. Outside, a cypress shifted in the wind. "My father built this collection," he said at last, which was true. "He cared about it more than he cared about anything living. When I was a boy, I used to come into this room because it was the only place he was ever still, the only place he was not—" Alessandro stopped, choosing the word. "Working. And now you come because he's gone." "Now I come," he said slowly, "because for the first time in this room, someone is making it alive again instead of just guarding it." He held her gaze. "You talk about these paintings as if they are people, as if they have hidden lives. I find I want to know what else has a hidden life that I have walked past for years without seeing." The air between them changed. Camille felt it the way she felt humidity in the gallery, a pressure, invisible, that would do damage if she let it. "That's a very pretty way," she said carefully, "of saying you're bored and I'm a novelty." "Is that what you think it is?" "I think," she said, picking her scalpel back up because her hands needed something to do, "that you're a man who's used to getting what he looks at. And I think I'm a woman who's worked very hard to be taken seriously by men who only ever looked. So I'm going to keep cleaning this painting, and you're going to keep being a novelty to me, and we're both going to be very professional about it." For a moment she thought she had angered him. His jaw tightened. Then, slowly, the corner of his mouth lifted, not the cold, not smile she'd seen, but something rarer and more dangerous. "You are the first person in years," he said, rising from the stool, "to tell me no and mean it." He walked to the door, then paused. "I find I like it more than I should, Camille." He left. She stood alone in the north light, with her heart doing something foolish and her scalpel trembling a millimetre above 600 years of blue, and she set the blade down before she could ruin a single brushstroke. "Professional," she told the empty room. The Madonna gazed back, serene and ancient, and said nothing at all. That night Camille could not sleep. She lay in the unfamiliar bed, in the unfamiliar dark, and listened to the house breathe, the tick of cooling stone, the far-off hum of the gate's electronics, once, faintly, a man's voice in the courtyard, speaking low and fast in Italian, then silence. She thought about the gun under the driver's arm. She thought about the way Alessandro had said, "working," like it was a word in another language. She thought about his eyes, that pale, impossible grey, and the way they had not once looked away from her face. She thought, "I should go home." She thought, "I'm not going to." And somewhere in the villa below her, Alessandro Ricci stood at a window with a glass of wine he did not drink, looking out at the lights of Florence spread below the hills like a fallen constellation, and understood, with the clarity of a man who had spent his whole life reading threats, that the most dangerous thing in his house was a woman in a paint-stained apron who had told him no, and meant it. He should send her home. He knew it. The job could be done by anyone with her credentials, and there were 100 reasons with his uncle's name on them, why a curious, observant outsider in this house was a liability he could not afford. He picked up his phone to make the call. He set it back down. The thing about Florence, Camille decided, was that it conspired against good intentions. The weeks folded into one another like the pleats of a curtain. She worked. The Madonna came back to life beneath her hands, her robe deepening from grey sludge to that impossible lapis blue, her face emerging from centuries of varnish until you could see the painter had given her a slightly crooked smile, secret and human, hidden under all that holiness. Camille wept a little the day she finished her. and was not ashamed. And Alessandro was there, always there. He stopped bringing excuses entirely. He came in the mornings with coffee and sat on his stool and listened. And slowly, without either of them naming it, the silence between them filled with talk. He took her into the city. The first time it was professional, a private viewing at the Uffizi arranged through a name that made the director himself appear, sweating, to walk them through galleries closed to the public. Camille stood before the birth of Venus and forgot Alessandro existed. And when she came back to herself, he was watching her face with that same complete attention, and she understood that he had not looked at the painting once. "You don't care about the art at all," she accused him, outside, in the gold light of late afternoon, spilling down the Arno. "No," he admitted. "Then why?" "Because you do." He said it simply, as though it explained everything, and the terrible thing was that it did. "I have spent my whole life around men who want things, money, power, respect, fear. I had never met someone who wanted beauty, who wanted to give it back to the world for no reason except that it should exist." He looked at the river. "It is the first uncorrupted thing I have ever been near. I find I cannot stop standing close to it." Camille did not have an answer for that, so she let him buy her gelato. Pistachio, the real kind, ground from Bronte nuts, and they walked along the river as the sun set the water on fire, and he told her about the city. Not the tourist city, his city. The alley where he'd hidden as a boy, the fountain where the water tasted of iron, the bell tower of a small church, Santa Felicita's poorer cousin, where he had once spent a whole night because he could not bear to go home. He knew Florence the way she knew a canvas, every crack, every hidden layer, every place where the surface lied about what was underneath. "You love it," she said. "It is the only thing I have never had to pretend about." A muscle moved in his jaw. "Everything else in my life is a performance. This city is the only audience I have never had to lie to." She should have asked what he meant. She knew by then that she should have asked a great many things, about the men who came to the villa at night and left before dawn, about the locked room off the east wing, about why a man who claimed not to care about art owned 40 pieces worth more than some nations. She knew the questions were there, waiting like mould under varnish. She did not ask them. She would later understand, choosing the beautiful surface over the rot beneath, exactly as she had spent her career teaching herself never to do. There was a night, she would remember it for the rest of her life, when a storm came down off the Apennines and the villa lost power, and she came out of her room with a candle to find Alessandro in the gallery, alone in the dark, standing before his father's portrait. The candlelight made his face strange, all hollows and edges. "He's watching you," she said softly, "even now." "He watched everything." Alessandro did not turn. "Do you know what he told me? The last time I saw him alive. He said, 'A Ricci does not get to be happy. A Ricci gets to be obeyed.'" The candle guttered. "He believed it was a kindness. He believed he was sparing me the disappointment of wanting things I could not have." Camille crossed the room and stood beside him in the dark. She did not touch him. She wanted to. The wanting was a physical thing now, a pull she had stopped pretending not to feel. "He was wrong," she said. Was he? Alessandro turned, and in the candlelight his grey eyes were not cold at all. They were terrified. "Then tell me, Camille, what is it that I want? Say it, because I have not let myself say it, and I think if you do not say it first, I am going to do something that ruins both our lives." The rain hammered the windows. The candle burned between them, and Camille, who had told herself 100 beautiful lies, opened her mouth to tell one more, and found she could not. "Don't," she whispered. "Not yet. Please. Once you say it, I can't go back to pretending. And I'm not ready to know what we are." For a long moment he looked at her. Then he stepped back, and the cold settled over his face again like varnish, and he said, "As you wish," and walked out into the storm-dark house, and Camille stood alone before the dead man's portrait and shook. It was the Annunciation that gave everything away. It hung at the far end of the gallery, a small panel barely 2 feet wide, attributed in the family's records to a follower of Fra Angelico, an angel kneeling before the Virgin, a lily between them, gold leaf gone to amber with age. Camille had saved it for last because something about it had bothered her from the first day, an itch she could not name, the way a single false note bothers a musician. She knew within an hour of starting that it was a fake, a good one, an excellent one. The panel was genuinely old. Someone had sourced a 15th century board, probably stripped from a lesser, ruined work, and the painter had been skilled. But the craquelure was wrong. Real age cracks form slowly, the paint and ground shrinking at different rates over centuries, branching like rivers. These cracks had been induced, baked probably, or solvent-shocked, and under magnification they had the too even, too deliberate quality of a forgery aging itself in an afternoon. The gold leaf was modern, distressed to look old, and when she ran the ultraviolet lamp across it, the varnish fluoresced in a way no 500-year-old surface ever would. "You're a liar," she told the angel, fascinated rather than alarmed. Forgeries were a part of the trade. Collections accumulated them. Even great museums had been fooled. She would simply document it and tell the family their Annunciation was a 19th or 20th century deception, and they could decide whether to keep it as a curiosity or quietly remove it. But the panel was warped, and to stabilize it, she needed to remove it from its frame, and that was when she found the rest. The frame was old gilt wood, heavy, with a backing board that had been screwed, not nailed, screwed, with modern Phillips head screws into place. She removed them one by one, frowning, because no 15th century frame had Phillips head screws, and when she lifted the backing board free, something fell out into her lap. A sheet of paper. Folded. Modern, printer-weight stock. She unfolded it under the work-table lamp. It was a map, or a diagram, she could not at first tell which. A web of European cities rendered as nodes: London, Geneva, Luxembourg, Monaco, Vaduz, Valletta, a dozen more, connected by lines that branched and converged. Beside each city, columns of numbers and abbreviations. GVA, 4.2, clear. LUX, holding, 11.6. VDZ, Ricci/Marchetti, pending. Arrows pointed from one node to another, and at the centre of the web, circled twice in red ink, was a single word: Firenze. And beneath it, smaller: Col. 38 units. Volt. Camille stared at it for a long time. She did not understand most of it. She understood Ritchie. She understood that collection meant collection, and 38 units was almost the number of paintings in this room. She understood that the numbers beside the cities were money. The amounts had that round, deliberate look of laundered sums. And she understood, with a slow, cold dread spreading up from her stomach, that she was holding something she was never, ever supposed to see. Her first instinct, the instinct of a professional, was to photograph it. Document everything. That was the rule. You never altered evidence. You recorded it first. She had her phone out before she fully decided, and she laid the sheet flat and took 3 clear photographs. And then she sat back and tried to think. She should ask Alessandro. That was the reasonable thing. There was surely an explanation. The numbers could be anything: shipping, insurance valuations, the boring arithmetic of a wealthy family's holdings. But the gun under the driver's arm, the man at the gate who never slept, the locked room. A Ritchie gets to be obeyed. The silences, the money that she had spent 2 months not asking about because the surface was so beautiful she had not wanted to see the rot. She thought of her oldest friend, Théo Marchand, whom she had met at 14 at a summer programme in Lyon, who had grown up to do something with the police that he was careful never to explain in detail, and who worked now, she knew this much, out of an office in Lyon that answered to no single country. Interpol. He had told her once, half joking, "If you ever see something you can't explain, Cammy, send it to me before you ask anyone you trust. Trust is how people end up dead." She had laughed at the time. She was not laughing now. Her hands were shaking. She told herself she only wanted his read on it. Was this nothing, or was this something? She told herself she would not send it if she let herself think too long. So she did not let herself think. She opened the messaging app. She found Théo's name. She attached the clearest of the 3 photographs and typed, before her courage failed. Found this hidden in a painting frame at the job in Florence. Probably nothing. But it scared me. What is it? She held her thumb over the send button. Down the gallery, the door opened, and Alessandro's voice said, "Camille? Lucia says you have not eaten." Her thumb came down. Sent. She did not tell him. That was the thing she would turn over forever afterward. That in the half-second between sending the photograph and Alessandro's footsteps crossing the gallery, she made a choice, and the choice was silence. "I found something strange," she said instead, sliding her phone face down beneath a cloth, her heart slamming. "The Annunciation is a forgery, a modern one. I wanted to confirm before I told you." He came and looked at the panel, frowning. A forgery? Something passed over his face. Not surprise, she noticed, even through her own fear. Calculation. "You are certain? It's not even a question. The craquelure is faked. The gold is modern." She heard her own voice running fast and forced it slow. "It happens in old collections. You'll want to have the others checked too, probably. There may be more." "Yes," he said slowly, his eyes still on the angel. "There may be more." He looked at her then, and for one terrible instant she was certain he could see straight through her, to the phone under the cloth, to the sent message glowing somewhere over the Alps in a Lyon office. "Is that all you found?" "That's all." The lie tasted like solvent. He held her gaze a beat too long. Then Lucia called from the hall, and he excused himself, and Camille sat alone with her hidden phone and the faked angel, and waited for the world to either resume or end. It ended at 11:40 that night. She knew the exact time because she was awake. Of course she was awake, lying in the dark, replaying the day, when her phone lit the ceiling. Teo. A voice memo, then text, then a call she did not dare answer, with the house so quiet around her. She read the texts in the blue glow, and the cold that came over her had nothing to do with the night air. Cammy, where are you right now? Are you safe? Answer me. Do not show this to anyone. Do not mention it. Act normal. This is a Europol-flagged network. The thing in the frame is a routing map. Money laundering, multiple families. The Florence node is the center, and you are sitting in it. I've had to report it. I had no choice. It's too big. There will be movement tonight or tomorrow. Get out, if you can do it without anyone noticing. If you can't, stay visible, stay normal, and I will get you out. Do you understand? Answer me. Camille's hands were shaking so badly, she dropped the phone. I've had to report it. The words rearranged the entire house around her. The beautiful surface peeled back all at once. And there was the rot. There had always been the rot, and she had cleaned and listened and let herself be charmed while sitting on top of it. Multiple families. The centre. You are sitting in it. She typed, I'm okay. I'm at the villa. I didn't tell anyone. What do I do? 3 dots. Then, stay in your room. Lock it if you can. Don't run yet. Running tonight gets you noticed. Tomorrow I'll have people in position. Cammy, I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have made that joke years ago. I never thought. Just stay alive until morning. Please. She sat in the dark, holding the phone to her chest, and listened to the house. And the house had changed. Or she had. Now every sound was a threat. The hum of the gate. A car. Was that a car? On the drive. Footsteps in the hall, soft, pausing outside her door, moving on. At 1 a.m. her phone buzzed once more, and it was not Teo. It was an unknown number, Italian prefix, 2 words. They know. She would never learn who sent it. She would wonder for years. She was on her feet before she had decided to move, throwing clothes into her bag with hands that would not obey her, and she had her hand on the doorknob when the door opened from the other side. Alessandro stood in the dark hallway. He was fully dressed, dark clothes, a coat, and his face was a mask she had never seen, white and absolute, his grey eyes blown black in the dimness. In one hand he held her phone. Her phone. She looked at her own bed where it should have been, and it was not there. And she understood that at some point in the night he had come into her room while she slept and taken it and read everything. And the violation of it was nothing, nothing against the look on his face. You sent a photograph, he said. His voice was very quiet and very calm, and it was the most frightening thing she had ever heard. Of the map, to a man in Lille. Tell me I am wrong. She could not speak. Tell me, he said, and took a step into the room, that you did not just sign your own death warrant, Camille. Because in 90 minutes, my uncle's people land in Florence, and the first thing they will do, the only thing they will do, is find the leak and close it. And the leak, his voice cracked, the mask splitting for one raw instant. The leak is you. The leak is sitting in front of me with paint on her hands, telling me she didn't tell anyone. I didn't understand what it was, she whispered. Alessandro, I swear, I didn't know. I just sent it to a friend. I didn't. I know. He closed his eyes. When he opened them, the calm had returned. But it was a different calm now. The calm of a man who has finished one calculation and begun another. I know you didn't know. That is the only reason we still have time. He held out his hand. Get your shoes. Leave the bag. Leave everything. We have to go, and we have to go now, and you have to do exactly what I say, because in this house, starting tonight, I am the only person who wants you to see the sun come up. There is a moment in every man's life, Alessandro's father had told him once, when he learns what he is made of. Not what you wish you were, what you are. And it is always uglier than you hoped. Alessandro learned what he was made of in the 90 minutes after he read the messages on Camille's phone. He had gone into her room intending to do the thing he had been trained from boyhood to do. He had suspected her since the afternoon, the forgery confirmed, but her hands too careful when she slid something under that cloth, her voice running too fast. He had taught himself to read deception the way she read brushstrokes. It was a survival skill in his family, and he had survived. So he had waited until the house slept, and he had taken the phone, and he had read it, and every line had confirmed the disaster. She had sent the map to Interpol, the network was blown, and there was exactly one clean solution that his entire life had prepared him to execute without hesitation. A woman who has seen what she should not see and talked. There was no debate about what the organization did with such a woman. He had watched it done. He had twice done it himself, and had not slept well after either, and had told himself that the not sleeping was proof he still had something human in him, when in fact it was only proof that he had not yet been broken all the way through. He had stood over her sleeping form with the phone in his hand and the clean solution in his mind, and he had waited to feel the cold click of the decision settling into place, the way it always had. It did not come. Instead, he had looked at her face in the dark, the smudge of paint she never quite washed off her cheekbone, the way she frowned even in sleep, as if even her dreams were arguing with someone about solvents. And he had thought, with a clarity that terrified him more than any threat ever had, if she dies, the world has one less person in it who makes things beautiful, and one more corpse with my family's name on it. And I have spent 30 years adding to the second column. I am tired. I am so tired, and I will not add her. It was not a noble thought. He wanted to be clear with himself about that, even now. It was not principle. He had no principles. Principles were a luxury for men whose fathers had not made them watch executions. It was that he could not bear it. He who had borne everything could not bear this one specific thing, a world without Camille Fontaine cleaning the grime off the face of a 600-year-old Madonna and weeping when the smile came back. So, he had made his choice, and his choice was treason. "Where are we going?" she asked. They were moving through the dark house, her hand in his, and she was keeping up, though her breath came in frightened gasps. He had taken her out a servants' passage his father had shown him as a boy, around the cameras, past the wine cellar that smelled of damp stone and old vintages. "Down into the city," he said, "on foot. They will watch the roads and the airport first. They will not think I run on foot through alleys, because they do not know I know the alleys. He stopped at a low door, listened, eased it open onto the cold night. My father took the boy who knew the alleys and tried to make him into a man who only knew boardrooms and guns. He never understood the boy was still in here. He looked at her, and something in his chest that had been clenched for 30 years loosened a fraction. Tonight I am very glad of the boy. They came out into a narrow lane behind the property wall, where the cypresses gave way to the first crooked houses of the city's edge. The lights of Florence lay below them, and above the rooftops the dome of the Duomo floated, lit, serene, indifferent. Somewhere in the dark a dog barked. Somewhere, he could not yet hear it, but he knew its shape. A net was closing. Alessandro. Camille stopped him with a hand on his arm. In the faint light, her face was fierce and pale. "Why are you doing this? You read my phone. You know what I did. By every rule you've ever lived by, you should be the one—" She could not finish it. "Yes," he said, "I should be." "Then why?" He looked at her for a long moment. Down in the city, very far away, the first siren began to wail. "Because, for the first time in my life," he said, "I have something I would rather save than obey." He took her hand again, and his grip was sure. "Now run, Camille, and do not let go of me, no matter what you see. I know every stone of this city. I am going to use all of it." And they ran down into the dark and beautiful labyrinth of Florence, two figures swallowed by the night, while behind them the lights of the villa came on one by one as the house woke to find the heir and the restorer gone. Florence at night is a different city from Florence by day. The tourists drain away, and the streets narrow to their medieval bones, and a man who knows them can vanish into them like water into sand. Alessandro knew them. He took her down through the Oltrarno, the artisans' quarter on the river's far side, where the workshops slept behind shutters and the lanes twisted with no logic a stranger could follow. He did not run in straight lines. He ran in the city's own grammar. Through a courtyard he opened with a key he should not have had, across a rooftop terrace where washing hung like ghosts, down a stair so old the steps were worn into smiles. Twice they pressed into doorways while cars slid past, headlights raking the dark, and Camille felt his body shield hers, his arm braced across her like a bar, his heartbeat steady against her back when her own was a panicked drum. "Who are they?" she breathed, after the second car had gone. "My uncle's men. Maybe the Marchettis too, if they have been told." His mouth was at her ear, his voice barely sound. "And somewhere, your friends' people. Tonight, everyone is hunting, and no one is sure who the prey is. That is the only thing keeping us alive, the confusion. When it settles, we will have very little time." They moved again. She lost all sense of direction. There was only his hand and the next dark turning, and the sirens that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. They crossed a tiny piazza where a single fountain dribbled, and he paused to let her drink, the water cold and tasting of iron, and she remembered, absurdly, in the middle of terror, that he had told her about this fountain on the day they ate gelato by the river. The water tastes of iron. He had been showing her his secret city even then. He had been giving her the map to her own escape, weeks before either of them knew she'd need it. "Why didn't you just send me home?" she asked while she could. Weeks ago, you suspected something. You could have just made me leave. I'd have gone. I'd be safe." He was quiet, scanning the roof lines. "Yes." "Then why?" "Because I am a selfish man," he said, "and I wanted more mornings of coffee on a stool watching you work. I told myself you were safe because I would keep you safe. I told myself the worlds did not touch." His jaw tightened. "I was wrong, and you are paying for my wrongness, and I will spend whatever I have left making sure you do not pay the whole price. Come, we are close." Close to what, she did not know, but she followed. He led her at last to a church, not the great ones, not Santa Croce or the Carmine with its Masaccio frescoes she'd have killed to see in daylight, but a small, plain church tucked into a fold of the old city, its facade unremarkable, its door, when he tried it, locked. He led her around the side to a smaller door, produced another key from the apparently bottomless supply of a boy who had once needed places to hide, and let them in. The interior was black and cold, and smelled of incense and stone and centuries. He did not turn on a light. He took her hand again and led her with absolute certainty through the dark, past the altar she sensed rather than saw, to a low door, and through it and up. The bell tower. She understood as they climbed the tight spiral of worn stone steps, her thighs burning, his hand pulling her up, round and round, higher and higher, until the steps gave way to a wooden ladder, and the ladder gave way to a trap door, and the trap door gave way to the open air. They came out into the bell chamber at the top, open on all four sides, a great green bronze bell hanging silent above them, and below. Camille gasped. All of Florence lay spread beneath them in the dark, gold-lit and ancient, the Duomo close enough to touch, the river a black ribbon stitched with bridges, the whole improbable city glowing under the indifferent stars. And threading through it, blue and red, the lights of police cars, moving, searching, and over it all the sirens rising and falling like something breathing. "This is where I came," Alessandro said quietly. "The night I could not go home. I was 10 years old. I sat up here until dawn." He stood at the open arch, the wind moving his coat, looking out over the city he loved. "I have never told anyone that. I have never told anyone most of what I am about to tell you." He turned to her, and in the gold light of the city below, his face was naked in a way she had never seen it. "But you sent a photograph to Leon, and the world is ending, and I find I do not want to die, or to lose you, which is the same thing now, with you thinking I am only the thing my family made." Camille came to stand beside him at the edge of the high, dark air, the city burning gold beneath them and the sirens singing through the streets, and she said, "Then tell me. Tell me all of it. We have until dawn." And far below, the net drew tighter. He told her about the boy. "I was 10, Alessandro began. The wind off the hills moved through the bell chamber, cold, smelling of the river and of the green bronze bell above them. It was October. I remember because the leaves on the cypresses, they do not turn, cypresses, they stay green, but the vineyard below the villa had gone red and gold, and I remember thinking it was beautiful from my window that morning. I was a boy who thought things were beautiful. My mother had taught me that. She was French." He glanced at Camille. Like you, half. She died when I was 8. After that, there was only my father, and my father did not believe in beautiful things. He believed in strong things, which he thought were the opposite. Camille said nothing. She had learned, restoring paintings, that the most important work was done in silence, that you did not rush the surface, that you let the thing beneath reveal itself in its own time. She gave him her silence now, like a gift. That morning he came to my room himself, which he never did, and he said, "Today you become a man." I was 10. I thought he meant, I don't know what I thought, a hunting trip, a horse. He drove me himself, no driver, down into the city, to a warehouse near the river. And inside the warehouse, Alessandro stopped. His hands were very still on the cold stone of the arch. There was a man tied to a chair, a man I did not know. He had done something, stolen or talked or simply been on the wrong side of an arrangement. I never learned which, and it did not matter. And my father put his hand on my shoulder, here. He touched his own shoulder, and he said, "Watch. A man who cannot look at this has no right to give orders to men who can. Watch, and do not look away, and afterward you will be more than you were this morning." The sirens wailed far below, threading through the streets. I looked away, Alessandro said softly. The first time. I was 10, and I shut my eyes and I turned my face into my father's coat, and he took my chin in his hand, gently. That was the worst of it, gently, and he turned my face back, and he held it there, and he said, "No, you will watch. I am doing this because I love you. The world will eat a man who closes his eyes." He drew a breath. So I watched. And the thing I remember, the thing I have never told anyone, is not the blood. It is that afterward my father took me for ice cream. Pistachio. He bought me pistachio gelato, and we sat by the river, and he talked to me about football, about the Fiorentina match that weekend, as if nothing had happened, as if he had not just... His voice stopped. And I ate the ice cream. That is what undoes me when I cannot sleep. Not that I watched a man die, that I ate the ice cream afterward, and it was good. Camille realized she was crying, silently, the tears just running, the wind cold on her wet face. She thought of the gelato by the Arno weeks ago, pistachio, how he had watched her eat it instead of the river, and she understood now what she had not understood then, that he had been trying, in some wordless way, to write a new memory over the old one, to make pistachio mean her instead of that. "Monsters aren't born," she said, when she could speak. "They're made, built, one held open eye at a time." "Do not make excuses for me." His voice was rough. "I have done things, Camille, as a man, by choice, not as a held open eye. I have made other people's children into orphans. I have signed warrants like the one that should have my name on it tonight. And twice I did not sign them, I did them with my own hands. I am not a tragic boy. I am a man who became exactly what he was built to become, and was good at it, and slept at night because I told myself I had no other choice." He turned to her at last, and his grey eyes were wet too, and that undid her more than anything. "And then a woman came to clean my dead father's paintings and told me I should be ashamed. and called a radiator obscene, and talked about hidden underdrawings as if the world had secret beauty in it that you only had to be quiet enough to see. And for the first time since I was 10 years old, I wanted to be more than the thing in the warehouse. Not for honour, not for redemption, just to deserve to sit on a stool and watch you work. The city glowed gold beneath them. The sirens sang, and Camille Fontaine, who had spent her life learning to see what lay beneath ruined surfaces, looked at the man before her and saw, with absolute clarity, the underdrawing of the boy he had been before they painted the monster over him. She crossed the small space between them and put her hands on his face, the paint still on hers, and she kissed him. Not gently, like she meant it, like the world was ending, because it was. They did not sleep. There was no question of sleeping. They sat together in the bell chamber with his coat around both their shoulders and the city below them, and they talked the way people talk when they know morning may take everything, fast and honest and without the small lies that fill ordinary days. She told him about her mother in Lyon, the apartment that smelled of turpentine because her mother had restored furniture, the way she'd grown up understanding that broken things could be made beautiful again, and had built her whole life on the belief. She told him about Theo, the friendship of decades, the half-joke about sending him things she couldn't explain. "I never thought," she said. "It was a photograph. I thought I was being a responsible professional, documenting a forgery." She laughed, and it broke in the middle. "I documented a forgery, all right." "You documented 40 of them," he said, "and the machine that ran them. You did, by accident, in one night, what 100 investigators could not do in 10 years. I should hate you for it." He pulled her closer under the coat. "I find I cannot." He kissed the top of her head. Below, the sky over the eastern hills had begun, almost imperceptibly, to grey. "What happens now?" she asked. "When the sun comes up?" He was quiet for a moment. "When the sun comes up, your friend's people will have the city locked. They will be looking for both of us, you to protect, me to arrest. And my uncle's people will be looking for both of us too, but they will not want to protect either of us." He chose his words carefully. "Camille, listen to me, because we do not have long. There is a way for you to be safe, truly safe. Your friend will offer it the moment he reaches you. Witness protection in exchange for your testimony. You saw the map. You found the forgeries. You can describe the collection, the men who came to the villa, everything. To Interpol, that is worth more than gold. They will take you somewhere new, give you a name, keep you alive. You should take it." "And you?" He did not answer. "Alessandra." She pulled back to look at him in the growing light. "And you?" "I will make sure you reach them," he said. "That is my part. After that—" "No." She gripped his coat. "We do it together. I testify. I tell them everything, and I'll make it a condition. I'll say I only talk if they protect you too. A deal. You give them the whole network, every name, every account, and in exchange, you get out. You get a new life. We get—" She was crying again, furious at herself for it. "We could disappear. Together. You and me. Somewhere with good light and bad coffee, and you could spend the rest of your life watching me clean paintings, and no one would ever make you watch anyone die again. I could give you that. Let me give you that." For a long moment he looked at her, and his face was so tender and so sad that she knew his answer before he spoke it. "No," he said gently. "Don't you dare say it's pride. It is not pride." He took her face in his hands, the way she had taken his, and his thumbs wiped at her tears and only smeared the paint and the wet together. "Listen. All my life, Camille, I have made other people pay for my sins. The man in the warehouse paid. His children paid. Everyone who ever stood in the way of my family's arrangements paid. And I stayed clean, and I slept in a villa full of stolen beauty. Every single day of my life, someone else has paid the bill for what I am." His voice was steady now, certain, the most certain she had ever heard him. "This time, I am going to pay it myself. Not them, not you, me. Do you understand? It is the first decent thing I will have done, and I am not going to let you talk me out of it, because if you do, I will go to my grave still being the man my father made, the one who always finds a way for someone else to bleed." "That's not decency," she whispered. "That's just another way to leave." "Maybe." He kissed her forehead, her wet cheeks, finally, softly, her mouth. "But it is mine to choose. For the first time, the choice is mine. Let me have it." The grey in the east had gone to rose. Below them the city was waking. A shutter rolled up, a vesper coughed to life, and beneath it all, closer now, the sound of engines converging, of doors, of a coordinated and final purpose moving through the streets toward the small church with the plain facade. Alessandro stood and pulled her up with him and looked out over Florence one last time in the breaking dawn. "They are coming," he said. "It is time. Do exactly as I say." He had planned it through the night while she slept against his shoulder, the whole choreography of his own undoing, worked out the way his father had taught him to work out everything, every angle, every contingency. The difference was that for the first time the plan ended not with someone else's blood, but with his own freedom traded for hers. He used her phone. He texted Théo Marchand directly, identifying himself, and what he wrote was simple and devastating. "I have Camille Fontaine. She is unharmed, and she is the reason your case exists. I am Alessandro Ricci. I will surrender myself, alive, with the location of the collection and full cooperation, on one condition. She walks free, uncharged, protected, today. I am in the campanile of San Nicolo Soprano. Come yourself, come unarmed to the door. If your people rush it, I disappear, and you lose us both." The reply came in 90 seconds. "Keep her safe, and you have a deal. 10 minutes. TM. "It's done," Alessandro said, and handed Camille back her phone. "Your friend is coming. He will keep you safe. I have read his messages all night, and he is exactly what you said he is. A good man, frightened for someone he loves. You will be in better hands than mine." "This isn't—" She was shaking her head, the phone clutched in her painted hands. "Alessandro, there has to be another way. We can still run. You know the city. We could—" "And spend our lives running?" He smiled, and it was the real smile, the rare one. "Waiting for my uncle's people to find us in some town with good light and bad coffee. You would clean paintings in a back room, and I would watch the door instead of you. And one morning they would come, and they would not be gentle, and you would pay, again, for being near me." "No." He shook his head. "This way you are free, truly free." witnessed, protected, on the right side of the law. And I... He looked out at the city, the rose light now flooding gold across the rooftops. I will be somewhere I cannot get anyone killed. There is a kind of peace in that. You cannot imagine how long I have wanted to be somewhere I cannot get anyone killed. She was crying openly now. He memorized it, the paint on her cheek, the fury in her wet eyes, the way she would not stop arguing even now, especially now. He thought he had never seen anything so beautiful, and he had spent his life surrounded by the most beautiful objects ever made by human hands. "There's one more thing," he said, "and you have to listen, because there isn't time to say it twice." He took her hands. "When this is over, and the lawyers and the courts and the years have done their work, you will be contacted by a man named Pessoa in Geneva, a notary. He is honest. I chose him for that. He has documents. Sign them. Don't argue. Don't refuse out of some idea that you can't accept it. Sign them." "What documents?" "You'll understand when you see them." Below, an engine cut out very close. A car door opened and shut with deliberate softness. He glanced down, then back at her, and there was urgency now under the calm. "He's here. Camille, look at me. Whatever happens in the next minutes, whatever they make me do, whatever face I have to wear when his people come up those stairs, it is a performance. You know about performances now. You know there is an underdrawing beneath the paint." He pressed her painted hand flat against his chest, over his heart. "This is the underdrawing. This is the real one. Remember it, no matter what the surface looks like." A voice called up from far below, echoing in the stone shaft of the tower.
"Richie, it's Marchand. I'm alone. I'm coming up."
"I'm here," Alessandro called back, and his voice when he answered the law was already different, flatter, harder, the mask sliding into place. Then, low, only to her, "I love you. I have never said that to anyone. I am saying it now, so that it is true before they take me, and not a thing I wish I had said." He kissed her once, hard, final. "Don't say it back. Save it. Say it to me through glass, someday, when it can't be used against either of us." Footsteps on the spiral stair, climbing. Camille could not speak. She nodded, the tears falling, her hand still flat over his heart, where he had pressed it. A man emerged through the trap door, lean, sandy-haired, gun holstered and hands visibly empty, his eyes finding Camille first with a flood of relief that confirmed everything Alessandro had read of him. "Camille," Théo breathed. "Mon Dieu, you're all right." "She's unharmed," Alessandro said, stepping back, raising his hands slowly, deliberately, away from his body. "And I'm yours. I'll give you all of it. The collection's in the villa vault. The routing is exactly what she photographed, and I'll name every account if you keep your word about her." He looked at Théo with the flat, grey calm of a man who has already left. "Cuff me in front of her. Let her see it's real. Then get her out of this country before my uncle's people realise what I've done." And in the gold light of the breaking Florentine morning, in the high stone chamber where a frightened boy had once hidden until dawn, Alessandro Ricci put his wrists together and surrendered the only thing he had never been able to give his father: himself. They took her out of Italy within 48 hours. It was a blur Camille would never fully reassemble. Safe houses, a small windowless room in Lyon, where she talked for 9 straight hours into a recorder, while 3 nations' worth of investigators wrote down everything she said. A doctor, a counsellor she did not want and could not use. Theo's worried face appearing and disappearing. She told them everything. The forgeries, the map, the men who came to the villa at night. The collection, piece by piece, in more detail than anyone else alive could have given. Because she had touched each painting with her own hands and knew its secrets. And she told them, again and again, until they finally wrote it down and let it stand, that Alessandro Ricci had saved her life, that he had surrendered voluntarily, that whatever they did to him, they were to enter into the record that he had walked into their hands of his own will to protect her, when every instinct of his life had told him to do the opposite. They'll factor it, Theo told her quietly, in a cafe in Lille, a week later, when the worst of it was over, and she was, technically, free. Cooperation matters. Voluntary surrender matters. He's giving them the whole European network, Cammy. Families that have evaded them for 30 years. It's the biggest thing to come across my desk in my career. And it exists because you got scared and texted your old friend a photo. He turned his espresso cup in its saucer. He won't walk. You understand that. He's done things before you ever met him. They have files. There are bodies attached to his name. But cooperation like this, with a good lawyer, he shrugged. 7 years, maybe. 8. Not life. Not death. Which, for a man like him, is a miracle, and I think he engineered it deliberately. He gave them just enough to be useful and structured his surrender to survive it. He planned his own sentence the way other men plan an escape. 7 years. Camille held the number in her hands like a found object. She was in Geneva 3 weeks after that, in the office of a notary named Pessoa, exactly as Alessandro had said. Pessoa was an elderly man with kind, tired eyes, who clearly knew more than he would ever say. He laid the documents before her with the gravity of a priest. Signor Ricci arranged this some time ago, he said, before the events. The transfers were complex. They are now complete and entirely legal. I assure you, they have been examined by authorities and found clean. They were executed before any charges, from assets that were always, in fact, legitimately his own, the one part of the family holdings that was never tainted. He slid the papers toward her. The collection, Mademoiselle Fontaine, all 40 paintings. They are yours. Camille stared at him. That's not possible. They're evidence. The forgeries are evidence and have been seized, Pessoa said gently. But there were 31 genuine works, and the family's claim to those was never in dispute, and Signor Ricci transferred them to your name through these instruments before he surrendered. The state has examined the transfer and released the genuine works to the rightful owner. He looked at her over his glasses. Which is you? He was very precise about it. He said, I wrote it down. He made me write it down to give to you. Pessoa unfolded a small slip of paper and read, Let you continue restoring beautiful things. That is what the world needs more than someone like me. Beneath the words, a string of numbers, coordinates. And the last one, Pessoa added, he said you'd know what to do with. A location. He called it the final treasure. Camille took the slip and could not read it through her tears. She did not go to the coordinates for a long time. She could not face whatever was there. What she did do, because she did not know what else to do with herself, because the genuine collection had to be stored and conserved somewhere, and she was now, absurdly, its owner, was rent a small gallery space in Florence, the city she could not bring herself to leave, and bring the paintings there, and resume the only thing she knew how to do. She restored them, one by one. It was the only way she could stay near him. The last one she had been working on, the day everything fell apart, was a portrait she had never finished. A young woman, 16th century, the attribution uncertain, the face badly damaged by an old, clumsy overpainting that some past restorer had slapped on to hide the loss. She had begun removing that overpainting weeks ago, in the villa, before the night of the map. Now, in her own small Florentine studio, she went back to it. She worked for days, lifting away another's clumsy lie a millimetre at a time, to reach the original beneath. And when at last the false overpainting lifted away at last, and the true face beneath emerged from 500 years of grime and one bad restoration, Camille set down her scalpel and sat very still, and the breath went out of her all at once. The face beneath was her own. She did not understand it at first. She told herself it was exhaustion, grief, the mind's habit of finding faces in clouds and damp stains. She stepped back. She approached again. She brought the lamp close and angled it low and studied the brushwork with the cold, professional eye she had spent 20 years training, the eye that did not lie to itself. The face was hers. Not approximately, not the way old portraits sometimes seem to resemble someone you know. The cheekbones were hers, the slightly asymmetric set of the eyes, the mouth that she had always thought too wide, the small scar through her left eyebrow from a childhood fall off a wall in Lyon. The painter had even given the woman a smudge of paint on one cheekbone, lapis blue, exactly where Camille's own habitual smudge always sat, a detail no 16th century artist could possibly have invented. The panel was old, the board was genuine, 15th or 16th century, the same kind of stripped, repurposed wood as the forged Annunciation. And someone very, very skilled, had painted her face onto it, in period materials, with period technique, and then deliberately overpainted it with a clumsy false layer, designed to look like old damage, so that whoever removed the overpainting would believe they were uncovering an original beneath. She knew only one collection of forgeries this good. She knew only one man who had access to a master forger capable of this. And she knew, the certainty arriving with the force of a blow, exactly when it had been made. He had commissioned it in those weeks, the weeks of coffee on the stool, the weeks he sat watching her work and claimed to care nothing for art. He had been having a forger study her face, secretly, to hide her inside a painting she herself would one day uncover, so that even if everything else was taken from him, even if he went to prison and she went to a new life with a new name, she would, sooner or later, lift away a layer of false damage with her own hands and find that he had placed her at the centre of the only thing he had ever loved. The final treasure, she thought. He hid me in his collection. He made me the masterpiece. It was the most extravagant, the most arrogant, the most romantic thing anyone had ever done to her, and it was so completely him. The man who could not say a soft word without armouring it, who expressed love the way he expressed everything, in objects and arrangements and contingencies planned 3 moves ahead. that she put her painted hands over her painted face and laughed until she wept, alone in the small, bright studio, while 500-year-old eyes that were her own looked patiently back. When she could breathe again, she understood two things with total clarity. The first was that she loved him. Not the way you love a tragedy, or a rescue, or a beautiful, dangerous stranger, but the plain way, the way that was going to be inconvenient and long and was not going to go away. She had perhaps known it in the bell tower. She knew it now, without any escape route. The second was that she was not going to disappear into a new life with a new name and let him serve 7 years alone behind glass, however much he had planned for exactly that, however nobly he had arranged her freedom. He had made one miscalculation in all his careful architecture. He had assumed that if he set her free, she would fly. He had forgotten that she was a restorer, that her entire life's work, her entire faith, was that broken things are not discarded, that you stay with the ruined surface through the long, slow, patient years it takes, and you do not leave, and one day the true face comes back. She would not leave. She found out where they were holding him. It took weeks, calls, Teo's reluctant help, the slow grind of an international bureaucracy that did not know what to do with a witness who wanted to visit the man she had helped convict. He had been extradited to New York to face the older charges there, the ones with bodies attached. The European cooperation had folded into the American case, and the sentence, when it came down, was as Teo had predicted: 7 years. He had structured his own surrender well. New York, an ocean away from the Florence she could not leave, where his paintings hung in her small gallery and her own face waited in a frame. She booked the flight the day the visitation was approved. She did not tell him she was coming. She wanted to see his face when the mask had no warning to prepare itself, wanted to see the underdrawing before the surface could be applied. She flew through a long grey night across the Atlantic and took a train and then a bus to a facility of concrete and wire and fluorescent light, and she sat on a plastic chair on one side of a smeared sheet of reinforced glass, and she waited, with paint still under her fingernails because she had been working that very morning and had not been able to stop herself, the way she had never once stopped herself. And when they brought him in, thinner, in grey, his wrists no longer cuffed, but his shoulders carrying the particular flat stillness of a man learning to live in a cage, he looked up and saw her through the glass. And for one full second, before the mask could move, before any performance could begin, Camille watched the underdrawing surface in Alessandro Ricci's face. He had not expected her. He had been so sure she would fly. He sat down slowly across the glass and picked up the phone, and his hand was not quite steady, and he said the only thing he could manage: "You were supposed to disappear." "I'm a restorer," Camille said into her own phone, her hand flat against the glass. "We don't leave. We stay until the face comes back." She came once a month. It became the architecture of her life, the way the collection had become its furniture. The first Saturday of every month, she closed the gallery, took the long flight from Florence to New York, slept badly in the same cheap hotel near the facility, and sat on the plastic chair on her side of the glass for the 50 minutes they allowed her. Then she flew home. It cost her most of what the gallery earned. She did not care. She had learned long ago to spend everything she had on the things that mattered, and nothing on the things that did not. And this mattered more than anything ever had. They were not allowed to touch. That was the cruelty of it, and, strangely, the making of it. Stripped of every other language, no touch, no privacy, no future they could point to, they were left with only words and the glass between them. And so they used the words better than most lovers ever bother to. She told him about the paintings, always the paintings, because it was their shared tongue, the safe country they could both live in. She told him how the Tintoretto's sky had been hiding a flock of birds under the grime, invisible for 2 centuries, that she had brought back. She told him about the science of it, the chemistry of varnish, the patience of it, and he listened the way he had always listened, with that total attention, leaning toward the glass as though he could climb through it into the warm, bright studio she described. "Tell me about the light," he would say. "Describe the light in the studio today." And she would, because she understood that he was a man who now lived under fluorescent tubes that never changed and never went out, and that what she was really giving him in describing the morning sun across a 600-year-old face was a window. She was restoring something in him, the way she restored panels, slowly, a little each month, lifting away the grey. And he gave her something back that astonished her. On her 4th visit, he picked up the phone and instead of hello, said something in halting, careful French. A line about painting, about how light falls on water, a quotation. She recognized it. It was from a book she had mentioned the month before, an essay by a French art historian she loved. "You learned French," she said, stunned. "There is a great deal of time here," he said, in English again, with the ghost of his old, dry humour. "And I wished to read the books you speak of. My mother was French, and I let it rot in me out of spite at my father. It seemed—" he turned the foreign words over. "It seemed a thing worth bringing back. You are not the only one who can restore a thing that has been let go." After that they sometimes spoke in French, badly on his side, patiently on hers, and it became another private room they shared, a language his father had despised, and he had reclaimed, syllable by syllable, in a cage, for her. They never said the word, not love, not once through the glass, in either language. He had told her in the bell tower to save it, to say it to him some day, when it could not be used against either of them. And they both kept to that with a discipline that was its own kind of vow. But it lived in everything else. It lived in the way she pressed her painted hand to the glass at the end of every visit, and he matched it with his on the other side, palm to palm, with an inch of bulletproof glass between, the closest they were permitted to come to touch. It lived in the way he learned a dead language for her. It lived in the way she crossed an ocean every month for 50 minutes, and never once let him talk her out of it, though he tried, the first year, out of guilt. "This is no life for you," he said once, early on, "waiting for a man in a box. You should let me go, Camille. Live. I arranged your freedom so you could live." "I am living," she said. "This is me living. You don't get to arrange that part." She pressed her hand flat to the glass. "You hid my face in a painting, Alessandro. You don't get to be surprised that I stayed to see the rest of the picture." He had gone still at that. The first time she'd acknowledged the portrait, the final treasure, her own face emerging beneath the false damage. For a long moment, he said nothing, Then, very quietly, "You found her. I found her. I was not sure you ever would. It was a foolish thing to do, extravagant. My father would have called it weakness." His grey eyes held hers through the glass. "I wanted you to know that I saw you, not the restorer, not the woman who could be a liability or an asset. You. I wanted to put you somewhere safe and permanent and beautiful, where no one could touch you, where you would last 500 years. The corner of his mouth lifted. "It is the only honest thing I made in my whole life, and I had to hire a forger to make it. There is a joke in that I am still learning how to laugh at." The guard called time. Camille pressed her hand to the glass, and he pressed his to match it, palm to palm, the inch between them, the whole distance of the world. "Next month," she said. "Next month," he answered, in French, and the word in his mouth was a promise and a small restored thing, light on water, brought back from the grey. 7 years is a long time to love someone through glass. Camille would not pretend later that it was easy, or that she never wavered. There were nights in the cheap New York hotel when she lay awake and did the arithmetic of her own life. 34, then 36, then 38, and wondered if she was a fool, if she was wasting the only years she had on a man the law had locked away, if love that could not touch was love at all, or only a kind of beautiful haunting. There were friends in Florence who told her, gently and then less gently, to let it go. There was Theo, who loved her like a brother, and who said once, miserably, "I started this, Camille. I sent the report. If I'd known it would cost you 7 years too," and she had stopped him, because it had not cost her 7 years. It had given her them. He did not understand the difference, and she did not entirely know how to explain it. But the work held her. The work always held her. She restored his collection painting by painting, and as she did, the small Florentine gallery became something of its own quiet reputation. The restorer, who owned a private collection of recovered masterpieces and tended them herself, who took on impossible cases the museums had given up on, who had a gift, people said, for bringing back faces everyone had assumed were lost forever. She trained 2 apprentices. She wrote a monograph on the conservation of 15th century gold ground that became, in its small, specialized world, something close to famous. She built a life with 2 hands, one of which always had paint on it. And once a month she crossed the ocean, and the life she had built came with her in stories, through the glass, into the grey room where the man she would not name her love for learned French and grew, year by year, a little less like the thing his father had made, and a little more like the boy who had once thought a red and gold vineyard was beautiful from his window. She watched him change. That was the strange gift of it. She watched him slowly, the way you watch a restoration, and she saw the grime lift. The flat stillness in his shoulders eased. The performances stopped. There was no one in a cage worth performing for, and gradually he simply became himself, which neither of them had ever fully met before. He read. He read everything. She brought him lists, and he devoured them, French and Italian and English, art history and novels, and once a book on the chemistry of pigments that he discussed with her for 3 visits running, asking better questions than some of her apprentices. His hair went grey at the temples, then more than the temples. He was 40 now, in a place that ages a man fast, and somehow he was less hard than he had been at 33, as though the cage had ground away the armour instead of the man. In the 5th year, his uncle Salvatore died, heart, in a federal facility in another state, the old machine of the family finally rusting to a stop, with the European network gone and the New York interests dismembered by the very testimony Alessandro had given. Alessandro told her through the glass, flatly, and she watched his face for grief and found something more complicated. He was the last of them, he said, the last who knew me as what I was. There is no one left now who would call me a Ritchie and mean the thing my father meant. He looked at his own hands. I am the end of it, Camille. The dynasty dies in this room, in grey clothes, with a man learning French. My father's whole life, all that blood, to build a thing that ends with me reading novels behind glass. He was quiet. I find I am glad. Is that a terrible thing to be glad of? No, she said. It's the least terrible thing in the world. In the 6th year, she brought him a photograph, it took a month of permissions, of the portrait. Her face, restored, hung now in the place of honour in the small gallery, lit perfectly, the lapis smudge on the painted cheekbone matching the one she could never quite scrub from her own. He held the photograph against the glass and looked at it for the entire 50 minutes, and at the end he said, in French, very low, "She is the only thing I ever got right." And Camille did not know whether he meant the painting or the woman it hid, and did not ask, because the answer was the same. The 7th year went slowly, and then, all at once, fast. Teo called her in Florence in the early spring. "There's a date," he said. "Good behaviour, the cooperation credit, all of it. They've set a release date." A pause. "Cammy, he's getting out." She was in the studio when the call came. She had been working all morning on a new piece, a damaged predella panel, yellow ochre and lead tin yellow, a saint's robe she was slowly bringing back to gold. She looked down at her hand, at the yellow paint dried into the creases of her fingers and under her nails, the colour of that morning's work. And she thought of all the mornings, all the years, all the colours that had dried on this hand, while she waited. "When?" she asked. Teo told her the date. Camille set down the phone and looked at the saint's golden robe coming back to life beneath her hands, and at her own face on the far wall, where Alessandro had hidden her at the centre of everything he loved. And for the first time in 7 years, she let herself believe in the ending she had refused to stop restoring. She did not wash her hands. She noticed it on the plane, somewhere over the Atlantic, on a flight she had taken so many times the cabin crew knew her face, the yellow paint still dried into the creases of her right hand, ochre and lead tin yellow from the saint's robe she had been working on the morning the call came. She had meant to scrub it off. She always scrubbed it off before she flew, out of some instinct that one ought to arrive clean. This time she had simply forgotten, in the rush and the disbelief, and now she sat with her painted hand in her lap, turning it in the cabin light, and she decided not to wash it. It seemed right. He had fallen in love, if that was even the word, with a woman who always had paint on her hands. He had hidden her in a frame with a smudge on her painted cheek. Let her come to the gate the way she had come to everything, mid-work, unfinished, the colour of that morning still on her. It was a different facility for release than for visits, a different procedure, a different gate. She had read the instructions 4 times. There would be no glass this time. That was the thought she could not get her mind around, sitting in the rental car in the grey dawn of the parking lot, watching the wire fence and the concrete and the single plain door through which, at some unannounced moment, he would walk out into the open air for the first time in 7 years. No glass, nothing between them. She had loved him for 7 years across an inch of bulletproof glass, and she did not, she realized, entirely know how to love him without it. The glass had been terrible, and the glass had been safe. Now there would be nothing, and the nothing frightened her more than she had expected. She got out of the car. The morning was cold and damp, the sky the flat, pale grey of late winter, and she stood by the fence with her painted hand jammed in her coat pocket and waited. She had imagined this moment 1,000 times over 7 years, and in none of her imaginings had it been like this. The banality of it, the wire and the concrete and the puddles in the parking lot, a guard somewhere checking a clipboard, the whole vast machinery of the state grinding through its final paperwork, while she stood outside it, shivering. There was no music. There was no slow motion. There was only a plain grey door and her own heart slamming and the yellow paint on her hand. And then the door opened. He came out alone. That was the first thing, the thing that undid her before he had taken 3 steps. He came out alone. No entourage, no lawyer waiting, no driver, no black car idling at the curb. The heir to a dynasty, the man who had moved through Florence trailing armed men, walked out of the prison gate with nothing. A plain coat, a small bag in one hand, his hair gone properly grey now, more grey than black, the morning light hard on a face that was thinner and older, and, she saw as he came closer, frightened in exactly the way the boy in the bell tower must have been frightened. The underdrawing right there on the surface for anyone to see, because he had no reason left to paint over it. He saw her at the fence and stopped. For a moment, neither of them moved. 7 years of glass had taught them stillness, taught them to wait, taught them that the distance between them was a fixed and unbreachable thing. The habit held them both frozen 10 feet apart in a prison parking lot, 2 people who had forgotten or never learned what to do when there was nothing between them at all. Then he came toward her, slowly, the small bag forgotten in his hand, and he stopped, close, closer than the glass had ever allowed, close enough that she could see he had not slept, close enough to touch, and neither of them touched. He looked down at her, and she watched him search her face, the way he had searched it that first day in the gallery, 7 years and a lifetime ago, with that total, rude, complete attention. And his eyes dropped to her hand, which she had taken out of her pocket without deciding to, and he saw the yellow paint dried into the creases, and something moved across his face that was almost too much to watch. "You're still working," he said softly, not a question, the way the driver had said it the first day. "A wonder." "A new one," she said, and her voice came out steadier than she felt. "A predella panel, a saint's robe. I was doing the gold when Teo called." She turned her hand so he could see it better. The ochre, the lead tin yellow, the morning's colour. "I didn't wash it off. I thought you'd—" She stopped. "You'll like it, when you see it. It's good. It might be the best thing I've done." He looked at the paint for a long time. Then he looked up at her, and the grey eyes were wet, and his voice, when it came, was barely sound. "May I?" he said, and he stopped, because he did not know how to finish it. The man who had spent his whole life taking what he looked at, who had never in his life asked permission for anything, stood in a cold grey parking lot and could not finish the question, because for the first time he was asking, and he did not know the words. Camille did not make him find them. She stepped into his arms before he could finish. He did not move at first. She felt it, the way he went rigid when she stepped into him, his whole body locking, his arms held out from his sides as though he had forgotten what they were for, as though 7 years of glass and a lifetime before that of a love that came with consequences had taught him that to hold something was to endanger it. For one terrible moment she thought he would not. She had crossed the last inch he had never been able to cross, and he stood frozen, with her face against his chest and his arms in the air, and she understood that he was afraid, not of her, but of his own hands, of what hands like his had done, of the permission he had not finished asking for. "It's all right," she said into his coat, which smelled of nothing, of institutional soap, of 7 years of grey. "You're allowed. There's no glass. You're allowed to hold me." And he broke. His arms came around her all at once, too hard, the way a drowning man takes hold, and he pressed his face into her hair and made a sound she had never heard from him, a single, rough exhalation that was the closest a man that controlled would ever come to a sob. And she felt him shaking, this man who had watched executions without flinching, shaking in a parking lot with his arms around a woman with paint on her hands. She held him. She had spent 7 years pressing her palm to glass, and now she had 2 arms full of him, and she held on with everything she had, the yellow paint surely smearing onto the back of his plain grey coat. And she found she was crying too, the both of them, standing in the cold and the damp, holding on as though the embrace were the only solid thing in a dissolving world. "I had a speech," he said at last, into her hair, his voice wrecked. 7 years. I wrote a speech about what you should do now, how you should go home and live, how I am too old and too ruined, and you have given enough. How I would understand." He pulled back just far enough to look at her, his hands coming up to frame her face, paint and all, the way she had framed his in the bell tower. "I had it all written, and you walked into my arms before I could give it, and now I cannot remember a single word." "Good," Camille said. It was a terrible speech. A laugh broke out of him, the real one, the rare one, more freely now than she had ever heard it, as though the cage had finally rusted off that too. "It was a terrible speech," he agreed. He looked at her, drinking her in, the lines around his eyes deeper than 7 years should have made them, and somehow making him more himself, not less. "You did not let me arrange your life this time. I never let you. You just didn't notice." She put her painted hand flat against his chest, over his heart, where he had pressed it that last morning in the tower. "This is the underdrawing. This is the real one. 7 years ago, you told me to say it through glass some day, when it couldn't be used against either of us." She held his eyes. "There's no glass, Alessandro. There's nothing left they can take. The dynasty's gone. The case is closed. You served the whole sentence. There's nothing on earth that can use it against us now." He went very still. "So I'm saying it." Her voice did not shake. "I love you. I have loved you since the bell tower, and probably since the stool and the coffee. And I loved you for 7 years through an inch of glass, and I am not going to spend 1 more minute not having said it out loud where you can hear it without a phone." For a moment he could not speak. His thumb moved over her cheekbone, over the place where the painted woman in the frame wore her lapis smudge, and his eyes searched hers as though he were still, even now, looking for the lie beneath the surface, the trick, the thing too good to be real. "I have been saying it in French for 7 years," he said, finally, roughly, "because I was too much of a coward to say it in a language you would fully understand. Je t'aime. Je t'ai toujours aimé." He pressed his forehead to hers. "And in English, which I have not let myself say since the tower, because I did not believe I would live to mean it again. I love you, Camille. You are the only thing I ever got right. The painting and the woman, both. The same answer to both." She laughed, wet and helpless, because he had heard her wonder that 6 years ago through the glass, and had kept the answer for now. A guard's voice called something across the lot. He had to move, the car, the paperwork, the world resuming. They broke apart enough to function, his hand finding hers, the painted one, lacing his fingers through the yellow without hesitation, getting the colour on himself and not caring. "Where do we go?" he asked as they walked toward the rental car, and she heard in the question 7 years of a man who had not been allowed to decide anything, asking at last, what came next? "Home," she said. "Florence. There's a saint's robe half finished, and a portrait on the wall I think you should finally see in person." She squeezed his hand. "And a city I think you'd like to walk through in the daylight for once, without running." He stopped at the car door and looked at her over the grey roof in the grey morning, and the smile that came over his face was unguarded all the way down. The boy and the man at once. "In the daylight," he said, as though it were the most extraordinary luxury ever offered to a human being. "Yes, I would like that very much." They went home to Florence, and Florence, which is built to hold beautiful things, made room for them. It was not simple at first. Nothing worth restoring ever is. Alessandro came back to a city where his name still meant something, though less than it had, and the something it meant was complicated. Old men who remembered the family looked at him sideways. There were 2 or 3 tense weeks early on when Camille worried that the past was not as dead as the court records said. But the network was gone, truly gone, dismantled by his own testimony, and the men who might once have wanted him dead for it were dead themselves, or in prison, or simply too old and too tired to care. The dynasty had ended in a grey room with a man learning French, exactly as he'd said. What walked the streets of Florence now was just a man, greying, quiet, unarmed, holding the hand of a woman with paint on hers. He had to build a self from almost nothing. That was the hard, unglamorous work of the first year, the work no one writes songs about. He had money, the legitimate remainder, carefully kept clean, that Pessoa had managed, but money had never been his problem. The problem was the days. A man who has spent his life being the heir to something, and then 7 years being a prisoner, does not automatically know how to be a person who buys bread and reads in the afternoon and has opinions about which way to walk home. He had to learn it the way he'd learned French, patiently, badly at first, then with a growing and surprising pleasure. It was Camille who suggested the teaching, half as a joke, after he'd spent an entire dinner explaining to her apprentices the historical context of the predella panel she was restoring, the saint, the period, the patron who'd commissioned it, the whole world the painting came from, with a depth and ease that had silenced the table. "You should do that for a living," she said, later, washing dishes. "You know more art history than half the people I trained with." "I learned it for you," he said, "in the cage, to have something to say to you through the glass. And now you have a whole language you learned out of love and nothing to do with it." She handed him a plate to dry. "There's a small university near the workshop. They're always short of people who actually know things. You'd have to apply like a normal person. No one would open a door for you." He had looked at her with something like terror and something like hunger. The two expressions she now knew were, in him, almost the same. "I have a record, Camille. I am a convicted, you're a man who served his sentence and happens to be the foremost living expert on a private collection of recovered Renaissance masterpieces," she said, "which, conveniently, you can take your students to see, owned by his wife." It was the first time either of them had said the word wife, and it hung in the steam of the kitchen, and neither of them took it back. He got the position. Not easily, not without an uncomfortable interview where his past sat on the table between him and the hiring committee like an object no one wanted to touch. But he got it. A few hours a week at first, a seminar on Florentine painting of the Quattrocento, taught by a greying man who brought his students twice a term to a small private gallery to stand before the real thing. His students adored him. He was demanding and dry, and occasionally, unexpectedly, moved. He could not get through the lecture on Fra Angelico without his voice changing, and none of them understood why. And Camille, who sometimes sat in the back, understood exactly why, and never said. He kept the books for her workshop. That was the other thing, the strange, domestic, almost comic thing, that the man who had once helped run a money-laundering network spanning a continent now sat at the kitchen table on Sunday evenings with a ledger and a cup of coffee, reconciling the small, honest accounts of an art restoration studio, the invoices for solvents and gold leaf, the modest fees, the apprentices' wages. He was meticulous about it. He was, she teased him, the most overqualified bookkeeper in Tuscany. He took it, every euro of it, as seriously as he had once taken arrangements worth millions, because this money was clean, every cent of it earned by beautiful work honestly done, and he had spent his whole life wanting to be near exactly that, and never believing he was allowed. They married quietly, in the second spring, in a small church, not San Nicolo, where the bell tower was. That one they kept for themselves, climbing it once a year on the anniversary of the night the world fell apart, to sit in the high air and look at the city and say nothing. They married in a plainer church, with Theo there, standing up for her, having long since made his peace with the man he'd helped imprison. The two of them grown into a wary, real friendship, built on the one thing they had always shared, which was loving Camille. There was no dynasty at the wedding. There was no money on display, no power, no fear. There was a greying man who taught art history, and a woman with paint on her hands, and a handful of people who loved them. and afterward they ate ribollita and drank Chianti and argued, the new family of them, about recipes. It was, Camille thought, looking around the table that night, exactly the kind of ending she had spent her whole life believing in, the kind that comes only after the long, patient, unglamorous work of staying. You do not abandon the ruined surface. You stay through the years it takes, and one day the true face comes back. 3 years into the new life, on an ordinary autumn evening, they cooked together and argued about ribollita. This was a recurring war, conducted entirely in love. The argument was about the bread. Camille, who had learned the dish from a Florentine neighbour and considered herself the authority by adoption, insisted the bread must be properly stale, days old, torn rough, added late so it kept some texture. Alessandro, who had eaten ribollita made by his grandmother before his father had taught him to despise soft things, insisted with the absolute conviction of childhood memory that the bread must be cooked down until it nearly dissolved, until the whole thing was a thick, almost solid mass you could stand a spoon in. Neither would yield. They had been not yielding for 3 years. It was one of the great pleasures of both their lives. "Your grandmother," Camille said, standing at the stove in the gold light of the kitchen, was overcooking it. Alessandro, chopping cavolo nero at the counter with the precise economy of a man who did everything precisely, made a sound of deep, theatrical offence. "You did not know my grandmother. She was the only Ricci who ever made anything with her hands instead of taking it with them." "You will not insult her, Ribollita." "I'm not insulting her. I'm insulting her bread technique. It is the same thing." He scraped the greens into the pot, and his hand brushed her hip as he reached past her, unhurried, casual. The touch of a man who had finally, fully learned that he was allowed. 7 years it had taken him to stop flinching from his own hands. Now he touched her constantly, without thinking, as if making up for lost time. A hand at the small of her back, fingers laced through hers under the table, his arm around her at the window. "My grandmother," he went on, stirring, "would have looked at your bread, floating there with its texture, and she would have said it was the soup of a person who does not commit, a person who wants the bread to stay bread and be soup. You cannot have both," she would say. "You must choose what the thing becomes." That's a very philosophical position on soup. Everything is philosophical if you are Italian and over 40. He tasted from the wooden spoon, considered, added salt. She was right, though, about committing. It took me a very long time to learn it. He glanced at her, and the dry humour softened into something else. "You commit your bread. I will give you that. You always have. You committed to a man in a box for 7 years. You do not float." "No," Camille agreed, leaning into him. "I sink to the bottom and become part of the thing. It's a character flaw. It is the only reason I am standing in this kitchen." He kissed the top of her head, the way he had on the night in the bell tower, and went back to his stirring. They ate on the small terrace, because the autumn evening was warm enough, and the light was doing the thing it did in Florence in October, going long and gold, and turning the red tile roofs to copper. They drank a Chianti that Alessandro had selected with great seriousness from a small producer he'd befriended. He had opinions about wine now. He had opinions about everything, it turned out, once he was allowed to have a self. And they watched the sun go down behind the Duomo, The dome a dark shape against a sky the colour of the saint's robe Camille had finished 3 years ago. Ochre going to gold, going to rose. She had been quiet for a while, watching him in the last light. The grey hair, the lines around his eyes that the 7 years had cut and the 3 years had not erased. The way he held his wine-glass loosely now, a man no longer braced against anything. She thought about the first day, the gallery, the cold grey eyes that had not looked away from her face. The man who had moved through his own house like a guest who wasn't sure he was welcome. She thought about how far the surface had been from the underdrawing, and how long it had taken, and how worth it the years had been. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "You may ask me anything." He said it simply. It was a small marvel, 3 years on, that he meant it, that there were no longer any rooms in him locked against her, no map hidden in any frame. "Do you regret anything?" He did not answer quickly. That was one of the things she loved most about who he had become, that he took questions seriously now, turned them over, gave them their due weight instead of deflecting with the cold, quick certainty his father had drilled into him. He looked out at the city, at the dome going dark against the burning sky, and he thought about it, really thought, the wine forgotten in his hand. "About what I did," he said at last, slowly. "Yes. There is not a day I do not regret it. The man in the warehouse, the ones after, the orphans I made. I will carry that until I die. And I should, and I do not want to be a man who has made his peace with it, because a man who makes his peace with that becomes my father." He turned the glass. "I taught a seminar today on penitence in Renaissance painting. The penitent Magdalene, Saint Jerome beating his breast with a stone. The students think it is history. I think about it every day of my life. So, yes, I regret almost everything I did." "Almost?" He looked at her then, and the gold light was on his face, and the grey eyes that had once been the coldest thing she'd ever seen were warm all the way down. No varnish, no mask, only the underdrawing, only the real one. "About meeting you," he said. "No. That is the only thing in my whole life I do not need to rewrite. Everything else I would do differently if I could. Not that. Never that." He reached across the small table and took her painted hand, the one that always, still, had a little colour on it. And he held it the way you hold something you have been given undeserved, and intend to spend your life trying to deserve. "You are the one page I would leave exactly as it is." Camille turned back to the painting propped at the edge of the terrace, a new one, a small private thing she was making for no patron and no museum, just for the two of them. And she hid a smile in the small brush she had not quite put down, the way she could never quite put down the work. Outside the window, Florence darkened gently toward night, the lights coming on across the hills, the river catching the last of the rose. The city had held a great many stories in its long life, wars and plagues, betrayals and dynasties, men who watched executions and called it love. It had room for this one too. It seemed, in fact, almost to have been built for it, a place that knew how to keep beautiful things, and how to bring back the ones that had nearly been lost, and how, against every expectation, to hold a story all the way through to an unexpectedly happy end. Years later, though not so many, they did not waste the years they had left, having learned exactly what years were worth. A young woman came to the small Florentine gallery to interview for an apprenticeship. She was nervous, talented, badly dressed in the way of people who have spent all their money on their education and none on themselves, and Camille recognized her instantly, because she had been her 20-some years before, arriving in Florence with holes in her shoes and a head full of brush strokes. The young woman walked through the gallery the way Camille had walked through the Ricci collection that first day, slowly, chin tilting up, forgetting to be nervous in the face of so much beauty. She stopped, the way they all stopped, before the portrait. The woman with the wide mouth and the asymmetric eyes and the small scar through her left eyebrow, the lapis smudge on her painted cheekbone, the face that anyone who looked from the painting to the gallery's owner would realize with a small shock were the same face, decades apart. "This one is extraordinary," the young woman said. "The condition, it's perfect. And the face." She looked from the painting to Camille and back, and flushed, and did not quite dare to ask. 16th century, Camille said, which was true of the panel. Restored about 20 years ago. There was a great deal of false damage to remove. Someone had overpainted it deliberately to hide what was underneath. She smiled. Whoever made it wanted to be sure that only a real restorer would ever find the true face. Someone patient enough to lift away the lie. And you found it. I found it. Camille looked up at her own face, ageless on the wall, where a dangerous man had hidden her at the centre of the only thing he ever loved, so that she would last 500 years. It taught me the most important thing I know about this work, which I will now teach you, if you come to work for me. She turned to the young woman. We don't restore paintings, not really. We restore faith. The faith that a thing which looks ruined is not ruined, that there is a true face under the damage, and that it is worth the years it takes to bring it back. Most people give up on ruined things. They throw them away. They paint over them and pretend. She looked back at the portrait, and her voice was very gentle. We don't. We stay. We're the ones who stay until the face comes back. The young woman got the apprenticeship. That evening, Camille climbed the stairs to the apartment above the workshop, where the windows looked out over the red roofs toward the dome, and where a greying man sat at the table with the workshop's ledger and a glass of Chianti, reconciling the small, honest accounts of a beautiful life. Looking up when she came in, with the unguarded warmth that 20 years had only deepened. You hired her, he said. Not a question. He knew her face. I hired her. She stopped at the portrait. They always stop at the portrait. She crossed the room and stood behind his chair and put her arms around him, her chin on the grey of his hair, and looked out the window at the city going gold and rose, the way it always did, the way it would long after both of them were gone. A city built to hold beautiful things and to bring back the ones nearly lost. Do you ever think, she said, about how it almost didn't happen? Any of it. One photograph, one night, the whole thing balanced on it. Every day, he said. He set down the pen and laid his hand over her painted one, where it rested against his chest, over his heart, in the place that had never changed, the underdrawing beneath every surface they had ever shown the world. I think about the man I was supposed to be, the one who would have made the clean choice that night, who would have stayed a Ricci, who would have lived in a villa full of stolen beauty, and died as my father died, obeyed and alone. His thumb moved over the dried colour on her knuckles. And then, I think, a woman came to clean my paintings and told me I should be ashamed. And the whole architecture of my life, everything my father built, every wall and every gun and every lesson in the warehouse, all of it lost to one French restorer with paint on her hands, who would not look away. You make it sound like I saved you. You did not save me. He turned in the chair to look up at her, and in the gold evening light his face was the face she had spent a lifetime restoring, the boy and the man at once, the true one, brought all the way back. Saving is too gentle a word. You restored me. You lifted away every false layer, 1 millimetre at a time, for years, with a patience no one in my life had ever shown a living thing. And you did not stop. And you did not throw me away. And one day, his voice caught, even now, even after all the years, one day, the true face came back, the one underneath. The one I did not know was still there. He pressed his lips to her painted hand. I was the ruined panel, Camille. You were always the restorer. That was the whole story, from the first morning. I just took 20 years to understand the work you do. Outside, Florence held them the way it had held everything beautiful for 1,000 years. The dome, the river, the long gold light over the roofs. Somewhere a bell began to ring, a small church bell, perhaps San Nicolo, perhaps another. The city was full of them, and they all rang the same patient note across the rooftops as the sun went down. Camille rested her chin on his grey head and watched the light, her hand under his hand over his heart, the paint still on her fingers from the morning's work, because there was always work, always another ruined thing waiting to have its true face brought back, always another reason to stay. She had never left. She never would. And the city, indifferent and ancient and beautiful, seemed almost to lean close around the small lit window, the way it leaned close around all its best-kept stories, the ones that should have ended in blood, and ended instead, against all the odds the world could muster, in gold light and the ribolita, and a hand held over a quiet heart, in an unexpectedly, stubbornly, perfectly happy end.